Now, Julian Castro has unleashed a prison reform package he calls the People First Policing Plan. So Julian Castro has the People First Policing Plan, and we're going to hear just a small clip of him talking a little bit about it. But first, let's listen to this.
In the first 2 years of the Obama administration, nearly 800,000 immigrants were deported, far more than during President Trump's first 2 years. Would the higher deportation rates resume if you're president?
Absolutely not, number one. Number two, everything landed on the president's desk the locust. I found that the secretary, we sat together in many meetings. I never heard him talk about any of this when he was the secretary. Please be respectful. Please be respectful in the crowd. Please continue, Mr. Vice President. The fact is, I don't know if you can hear, I can hear, but we can hear fine.
So that's American democracy at its finest. So you had some hecklers. They heckled Bill de Blasio saying, fire Pantaleo, and then you also had some hecklers heckling Biden saying 3 million deportations. Barack Obama was the deporter-in-chief. He was the deporter-in-chief, and Biden's the vice president, and Bill de Blasio wanted to know what his advice was to Barack Obama, but he wouldn't tell us, right, because it's a big secret. He's, probably in favor of deporting 3 million people. So that was fun, right? Those hecklers, thank you, hecklers, for bringing the Pantaleo and the 3 million deportation issue into the conversation, into the national conversation.
Please continue.
The fact is, what the senator from New York talked about is seeking asylum.
In California, and I'm proud of that.
I want to bring in Congresswoman Gabbard. Congresswoman Gabbard, you took issue with Senator Harris confronting Vice President Biden at the last debate. You called it a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is a racist.
Now, Tulsi Gabbard is going to pivot immediately and just talk about Kamala Harris's crappy criminal justice record in California. But that's weird that Tulsi Gabbard would defend Joe Biden and say that he's not a racist because Joe Biden was opposed to busing. I don't think you could be more racist during the civil rights era, during integration, to say no to busing for America, no federal busing whatsoever. And so just leave it up to the local and the state government. That would have been a great way to encourage integration if you're being serious about it. Joe Biden was not being serious about it. He is a racist piece of shit. He's also not progressive on, he voted for the Iraq War, he voted for the Patriot Act, he voted for the Afghanistan War, he fucked over the students with the bankruptcy bill. Every goddamn major issue, he's like the opposite of a Bernie Sanders. Bernie showed courage on every major issue. Joe Biden, he showed, none. He's got no spine to stand up for progressive values. He's a neoliberal. He's Hillary 2.0. He is the, front runner, which means the Me Too era is over. And, there's just nothing good I could say about
I want to bring the conversation
Biden.
back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence.
That was major. So just to repeat, Kamala Harris had thrown 1,500 people in jail in California for marijuana. Now she's in favor of the legalization of marijuana. Also, she wants to end the war on drugs, and she's for body cameras. So she has evolved on all these issues, but this prosecution record, she's going to prosecute the case against the president. So it's all about law and order for her. She's the main, prosecutor. I'd like to hear more progressive values from Kamala Harris because these are concerning to me. The people that were thrown in jail, by Kamala Harris for marijuana violations should be freed, not just, whatever they call that, but they should be freed. The expungement, not just expunged, but they should be liberated.
That would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California, and she fought to keep past jail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
So let's review all the things that she said. She said that there was an innocent man on death row. She withheld evidence against him, knowing he was free until she was forced to do so. All these things are true. She threw 1,500 marijuana users in jail.
We're concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. That would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California, and she fought to keep...
So she fought for the cash bail and then the prison labor. She wanted slave labor, so there was an argument by her Attorney General's office that there's a there's a court case that said that California's prisons are overcrowded, which constituted cruel and unusual punishment, so therefore they needed to release some, and then Kamala Harris's office had made the argument that they had a drought and they had to use in prison labor to fight the wildfires and for only $1 or $2 a day. So she wanted to. That was an argument used by her team, her office, and she's going to say that she told them not to say that, and as soon as she found out and all this bullshit. But I bet you at one point in time she considered it. So the whole, wanting to keep people in prison in California for their cheap slave labor, that's accurate. And then they're going to fight against bail bonds, whereas Tulsi Gabbard is all about, or is fighting for bail bonds. So Tulsi is against bail bonds, Kamala is for bail bonds. So Tulsi Gabbard says, that hurts poor people too.
Cash jail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And
so Kamala Harris says that she's got a national model. She was a leader in this field. She doesn't actually specifically answer any of the charges. So it's interesting to see how Kamala Harris, responds to someone prosecuting her record. And I think Tulsi really bodied Kamala about this. This was a unspoken secret. Everybody knew about this, and now Tulsi Gabbard just brought this to light. So let's talk about Kamala's, Kamala's prosecutorial record.
And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work.
So she's saying, well, I was actually the Attorney General, so I was part of the executive branch. I was actually doing some, Tulsi. I was actually, getting stuff done, Tulsi, who's just in the Congress just talking about it in speeches and passing laws, which is her job, but that's okay.
Of being in the position to use the power that I have to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about re-entering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring up.
So she's going to legalize marijuana. She said she's in favor of the legalization of marijuana. So there's her policy, right? So that's actually pretty. That's, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard. They all want to legalize marijuana. But Pete Buttigieg doesn't want to end the war on drugs, whereas Kamala Harris, Tulsi Gabbard, and Bernie Sanders wants to end the war on drugs in its entirety.
Congresswoman Gabbard, back in your response.
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you are in a position make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that, and the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
She absolutely does owe all of them an apology. She needs to talk about each one of those issues that Tulsi Gabbard had brought up and say, well, here it is in full detail. And so, right, you're going to prosecute the case against Donald Trump when Donald points out, well, hell, you're just like me, with the high, fascism, authoritarian, prosecutory thing. So how is she going to respond to charges leveled at her? This is just to her public record, too. And so that's policies. She's not saying Kamala's a bad person and this and that, but essentially she supported policies which are damaging to a lot of people, and that's absolutely true. 1,000 convictions were overturned. You know, she threw all those people. Now she's for legalizing marijuana, but what about those 1,500? Are they still sitting in jail? So she needs to answer, you know, all those charges in a bunch of detail, whether she's right or wrong, whether she learned something from it. And but instead, Kamala Harris answers none of the charges. She doesn't talk about any, you know, thing that Tulsi Gabbard had brought up. And this is, you know, this is a serious concern. So Kamala's just going to say she's a top-tier candidate. So, oh, yeah, you know, she's just the bee's knees. You know, she's a princess. And Tulsi is just kind of, you know, low level. She's got, what, polling at 1%. Then she throws the Assad attack at her. And then the media is going to ask Tulsi all about Assad, but they're not going to say shit to Kamala, who's the darling of the media, which should, you know, raise an eyebrow for you. She's the darling of the media, so she's not even being pushed on this question. They might bring it up, but they don't ask a follow-up question and just say, well, you know, what happened with, you know, that case? Was there a case where there was something, you know, you didn't overturn evidence and there's an innocent man on death row and you fought to keep that information back? You know, ask her specific details. There's only 4 things that she had mentioned, right? The bail bonds, cheap slave labor, and then the 1,500 people in jail for marijuana, low-level, nonviolent marijuana offenses, and let's see, withholding the information, and then withholding the information on the people with death row.
Senator Harris.
My entire career, I have been personally opposed to the death penalty, and that has never changed. And I dare anybody who is in a position to make that decision, to face the people I have faced, to say, I will not seek the death penalty. That is my background. That is my work. I am proud of it. I think you can judge people by when they are under fire, and it's not about some fancy opinion on a stage, but when they're in the position to actually make a decision, what do they do? When I was in the position of having to decide whether or not to seek a death penalty on cases I prosecuted, I made a very difficult decision that was not popular to not seek the death penalty. History shows that, and I am proud of those decisions.
Now, Kamala Harris, that's absolutely true, too. So Kamala Harris had defended a man who killed a police officer, whether it's justified or self-defense or what the hell happened. There was a lot of pressure for her to execute the man that had shot and murdered the police officer, and she stood resolute because she was opposed to the death penalty. But there was also another case where, you know, the death penalty was ruled unconstitutional, and her office had provided an argument against it. So why wouldn't you just let that ruling stand? But she says that was her response, so she is for the legalization of marijuana. And then on the death penalty, she's been opposed to the death penalty, including that case where that guy murdered a police officer, and she chose not to execute him in spite of the public pressure. So those are 2 good things, you know, that she's for now. But what about, you know, the record? So she's using the correct rhetoric now, so I'm glad she's, you know, jumped on board and she's evolved, you know, more progressively. But she had a very regressive record. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read some of Julian Castro's People First policing plan, and then we'll get to, he just mentions that the police system is broken, so we need to fix it. And then Cory Booker also is mentioning something. So it's just, anyways, Julian Castro has a very ambitious police reform package, very ambitious. So he wants to end over-aggressing policing. He wants the federal government, including the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, to monitor excessive force, to police excessive force. So the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division specifically. Julian Castro wants to end qualified immunity once and for all. This is amazing. Immunity? Yeah, nobody gets immunity. That's absolute power. So ending qualified immunity, if you're guilty of, you know, murder, rape, you know, major crimes, you got to be handled. establish national standards for the nation's police, including local police who accept federal funding, limit the use of force to when there's an imminent threat to the life of another person, require officers to identify themselves and then give a verbal warning, and that give the person that they order, a lawful order, a reasonable amount of time to comply before using force. Require the use of de-escalation policies. Don't escalate situations, de-escalate. Be like Andy Griffith and de-escalate conflicts. Restrict police actions that cause collateral damage, such as shooting at moving vehicles. Must get written consent for search warrants. Make internal reviews mandatory in the school-to-prison pipelines. No more police as disciplinary agents. Bias training for school personnel. Establish a culture of police accountability amongst the police. Get body cameras for all the police. Make sure they have anti-bias training. Pass a law to end stop and frisk. Collect a database of decertified police and those police who have been fired for misconduct, and collect data, right? Data is the character on Star Trek, so database, and collect data on police stops, all detentions, searches, frisk, summons, and arrest. Build on the use of force data collection program. Eliminate consequence-free weapon discharges and arrest by requiring strict reporting requirements. Investigate police departments who fail to meet the standards. Investing in community oversight boards. Ensuring transparent investigations into fatal police shootings. So that is just, there's more, okay? So let's listen to, eventually, Julian, this is going to be Cory Booker at first, and then eventually we're going to hear Julian Castro.
Thank you very much. Drug offenses, because you stood up and used that tough on-crime, phony rhetoric that got a lot of people elected, but destroyed communities like mine. This isn't about the past, sir. This is about the present right now. I believe in redemption. I'm happy you involved. I want to bring in Secretary. No redemption to the people in prison right now. I want to bring in Secretary Castro. Your response, sir? I agree with Senator Booker that a lot of what Vice President helped alter in '98 that has put forward a police reform plan. Because we have a police system that is broken, and we need to fix it. And whether it's the case of someone like Tamir Rice or Michael Brown or Eric Garner, where the Trump Justice Department just decided not to pursue charges, we need to ensure we have a national use of force standard, and that we end qualified immunity for police officers so that we can hold them accountable for using excessive force. Question for you. Why are you the best candidate to heal the racial divide that exists in this country today, which has been stoked by the president's racist rhetoric?
Yeah, first of all, the president's racist rhetoric should be enough grounds for everybody in this country to vote him out of office. That one thing alone should be enough.
Okay. Yeah, so we have Julian Castro with this aggressive, he said that there's going to be a national use of force standard. So I'd mentioned that, but national standards for the nation's police, including local police who accept federal funding. So also, in addition to everything I mentioned, he's going to demilitarize the police. He's going to sign an executive order to prevent police departments from getting weapons of war, such as tanks, nukes, armored vehicles, high-caliber rifles, grenade launchers, aircraft equipped with weapons. He wants to deprioritize petty offenses in the broken windows theory of Rudy Giuliani's, invest in programs that address root causes and find alternatives to criminal justice investigations or interventions. He wants to invest in youth programs, in-court and out-of-court diversion programs for non-violent offenses, mandate community-led training for police departments in Section 287G under the Immigration and Nationality Act, provide alternative responses to 911 calls by establishing partnerships between mental health units and first responders, restrict equitable sharing program, which equitable sharing, that sounds like it's a good thing, so he's restricting the equitable sharing program. I just got a question mark on that. In civil forfeiture by requiring a criminal conviction before private property is seized and proceeds going to the Treasury's general fund or state equivalent to eliminate the profit motive of civil forfeiture by the police. All those are wonderful things. I agree with everything I listed there. And the one thing that I had a major question, that he wants next generation surveillance technologies like facial recognition software. So that's a little Big Brother, next generation surveillance technologies like facial recognition software. So that's yeah, that might be a little bit too far there, but this list is amazing. I'm going to actually just read it off, and then I'm going to just talk about the ones that I really like and why. National use of force standard. Having some standards is good. They have to, the military has, use of force or engagement rules. So unless they're shot at, they're not shooting at anybody. So they're not just, freaking out about, somebody holding a remote control. He's going to end qualified immunity once and for all. Immunity is absolute power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's going to establish national standards for the nation's police, right? So including the local police who accept federal funding. He's going to get anti-bias training. He's going to get some body cameras. He's going to pass a law to stop and frisk. He's going to have a database of all the police and all the arrests and the detention, searches, frisk, all the summons, everything that they do. So they're going to have more data about the police, and the ones that have been fired for misconduct, the ones who have been decertified, make sure they don't get jobs again. He's going to establish a culture of police accountability amongst the police. They're going to have to make internal reviews amongst themselves. There must be written consent for search warrants, so that strengthens the Fourth Amendment. Limit the use of force unless there's an imminent threat to the life of another person. Require officers to identify themselves, give a verbal warning, and gives the use of force just a limit to only when there's an imminent threat to the life of another person. So it gives the person a reasonable amount of time. So give a verbal warning. Okay, hey, I'm the police. You need to, put the stick down, and then you give them a moment to comply before using force. And then have de-escalation policies. You're not there to, make the situation worse. You're there to make it better. Don't shoot at moving vehicles. He's going to pass a law to stop people from shooting at moving vehicles. He's going to end the school-to-prison pipeline, so the police aren't going to be disciplinary agents anymore. They're there to stop a school shooting, but they're not there to, chastise or punish or arrest unless, the children are violent. And then bias training for school personnel. So bias training for police, bias training for school, bias training for everybody. Eliminate consequence-free weapon discharges. So if there's, a weapon is fired, then he's going to have strict reporting requirements. And for the arrest, too. So every arrest, every weapon discharge, you need to have, report the whole incident. Investigate police departments who fail to meet the standards. Invest in community oversight boards. This was one thing I liked about John Hinkenlooper. Community oversight boards. This keeps the police humble because the civilians are over the police. So having community oversight boards is exactly what everybody needs to do with the police, because they, and they have absolute power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Then they declare qualified immunity. So ensuring transparent investigations into fatal police shootings. So yeah, they should be transparent, those investigations. If the police shoot somebody, then, there's a 2-week leave, and then there's an investigation. Well, we need to know what the information is, what's the, final conclusion, and all that information needs to be available to the public. Demilitarize the police, so make sure they're not getting all these weapons of wars. Deprioritize petty offenses. So, if you raise a sunflower in Pueblo, then that's okay, even though it's against the law. Invest in programs that address root causes and find alternatives to criminal justice interventions. This is, 1994 Crime Bill had good and bad things to it. One of the good things it had were youth programs. They had midnight basketball programs for the police to essentially be friends with the community and not always just be a bunch of, fascist authoritarian pricks. In-court and out-of-court diversion programs for non-violent crimes. Mandate community-led training for police departments in Section 287G. I'm not for sure about that one. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, these are important if he becomes president. So what does this, what are these policies? It's very specific. So maybe I'll research it. Provide alternative responses to 911 calls. Establish partnerships between mental health units and first responders. 911 doesn't always have to be just the police. It could just be, EMS, or it could just be, somebody needing to talk to somebody. Restrict equitable sharing program, end civil forfeiture, and then get next generation surveillance technologies. So that is just such, except for the last two. All those things are amazing. It's, when I look at it, I'm just like salivating, right? All these things is what the police, there should be a national standard for the police. And the United States government should lead on this. So this is a fantastic, wonderful, everybody else needs to jump on, just like everybody needs to jump on Bernie Care, on board of Bernie Care, everybody needs to jump on Julian Castro's People First policing plan. So are we just, putting the police out there to make sure they have good lives, or are we, the police there to make sure they're protecting the people? The people should be first. So Julian Castro is right. It's a good name. People First policing plan. Too many P's, right? People First policing plan. But, that's the right mentality. So that's fantastic. Julian Castro has a nice, aggressive police reform package. And really, 95% of all of it was, phenomenal. So, yeah, Democrats